some biblical texts appeal to humility. Welcome to another tidbit from the Bible. I'm Dr. Paul Petersen. We are reading the book of Exodus, and the chapters 21 to 23 contain rules for justice, mishpatim, and they're spoken into a culture that I do not know very well, and a culture that not too many people know very well. And this is where we have to acknowledge a certain amount of ignorance, not to be too proud and think we know it all, because it's in reading these texts we may have a culture shock, and that's healthy enough, because we realize that we need to be careful not to interpret what we know too little about. And then remember, if someone says, why is this in the Bible? Now, these laws are not what the Christian is obligated to follow. They contain good principles, and we can apply these principles. But they are spoken into another culture, another time. They are not the Ten Commandments. They are not eternal principles in themselves. And then you could say, but why is this in the Bible? And my answer is because God is able to reveal laws and give advice even into imperfect cultures. He steps down to our human level. And because we know that he was able to advise people at that time in regard to their lives and existence, we can trust he's able to do that also to us today. So let's look at the text. First of all, chapters 21 to 23, laws, mishpatim, are put in a context that we could call the establishment of the covenant with Israel. From chapter 19 to chapter 24:11, you have a chiastic structure of this establishment of the covenant. God at first speaks to the people. They respond, whatever the Lord asks us to do, we will do. And then God invites them in chapter 19, verse 13, to come up to him on the mountain. Now this scene is somehow repeated in the first 11 verses of chapter 24. God establishes a covenant, the people have a response, and now God invites the leaders of the people to come up on the mountain to him. In between we have the Constitution, you could call it, the Ten Commandments spoken directly by God from Mount Sinai to the people. And then you have the equivalent, the mishpatim, these laws in 21 to 23 that are applications of the basic laws of the Ten Commandments. And then you have a small section in between with two laws on the altar and the basic sentence in chapter 20, verse 24, wherever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. God wants to be present with his people. That is his promise, and that is what Exodus tells about from the God who revealed himself to Moses at the burning bush, who spoke from Mount Sinai, and who at the end of the book will enter and take up his abode in the tabernacle. So let's look at the laws. There are two kinds of laws here. There are what you could call casuistic laws, case studies, and then you have apodictic laws. Apodictic laws are laws like you shall not. The case studies compress the first section from first verse in chapter 21 to 22:17. There are sometimes differences in how the versification of these chapters are, especially chapter 22. But you have first casuistic laws. What are these? These are laws where you have a narrative, a story. If a man does this or that, if this happens. So here you have laws written down as a help to the people when similar cases would occur. Remember, we are still in a highly oral culture. So these laws that are written down, they are like the foundation for similar cases. They are the precedents of similar cases. Now you know what to do. Now, people who read these laws today will very quickly say, I cannot find any red thread in any of this. And one of the reasons, sorry for that, is simply they are not written from our perspective and on the basis of our culture. So we need to go beyond our culture or leave our culture behind and realize that these are built up in a manner that may be different. And for these casuistic laws, there are some overruling perspectives that help us to understand. The first set of laws speak about situations where a person hurts another one. Then you have a situation where what a person owns, his possessions, maybe his ox, hurts another person. And then you have a situation or situations where the property of one person hurt the property of another. That is, you have uncovered your well and another man's animal falls into it. And finally, you have laws that concern hurt done by one person against another person's property, and some cases of force majeure, unlucky circumstances that lead to hurt. And what are the basic principle of justice behind all these laws? That is, there is to be a recompensation for the hurt that is done. Let's go to the quite often quoted and misunderstood sentence in the law. In chapter 21, you have this expression following: if there is a serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, and so on. The famous principle of eye for an eye, which is an expression found 3 times in the Pentateuch, here, and then in Leviticus 24:20 and Deuteronomy 19:21. These expressions are not to be taken as a literal: if you hurt another man's eye, you have to take out this guy's eye. No, these are all rules of compensation. And in contrast to our, let's say, perception, these are rules of a vendetta. No, these are rules to say so much and not more. There has to be a reasonable recompense, spoken into a culture where struggles easily escalated. You revenge, you do a little more, and then you hit back. We see that somewhere in the world today too, don't we? So this is simply an advance in the justice system to fair recompense for any hurt done. And I want to point out that there are other such advances. When we today read laws about the slaves, we may be shocked. But one of the points is actually that in a culture where they did have slaves, and where slaves generally were badly treated, that is what they often are, or most often, or always are, then God actually gives some laws that helps the slaves a little. Now, let me read one example from chapter 21. If a man, verse 20, beats his male or female slave with a rod and the slave dies as a direct result, he must be punished. Now, you have another law like that. You have laws in the Mosaic Code that actually takes care of slaves that are mistreated or punishes somebody who kills them. This is unique. You don't find such laws in the codes, the legal codes of the ancient Near East, except in the Mosaic Code. So God steps into an imperfect culture and tries to take the worst effects of that imperfection into consideration to work against it. That is what you find here. Now, with the time left, let's hurry to the second part of these laws in these mishpatim in chapters 21 to 23. Because the second part contains apodictic laws. It begins in verse 18, if I follow the versification of New English Bible, New International Translation. Do not allow a sorcerer to live. Anyone who has sexual relations with an animal must be put to death. Whoever sacrificed to any god other than the Lord must be destroyed. Now, reading this, you may again say, what is up and down? I just stumbled over a recent article in volume from 2025 of Journal of Biblical Literature, where some scholars point out that if we forget our cultural way of making text work together and try to understand this from inside, there is actually a meaning, there is a structure. There are 15 apodictic laws in this section, and they can be linked 3 by 3. So you have 5 threads. 3 that first are related to people who will be cast out of society, like those I mentioned. Next, to people who are oppressed. Next, to relationship to the authorities of society. Next, to the judicial system. And finally, to God's nation as such. Yahweh's people, his nation. Now, that means that you have 5 such threads, and you read from 1, 2, 3, or left to right, depending on how you will name it. And as you move from left to right, 1, 2, 3, you will find that the first of each of these threads of 3 is concerned with more mundane matters, and then it becomes more and more religious, more and more principle, and the last of these 3, and you have 5 times 3, are all concerned with relations to God. Now, the scholars point out this is a completely different way of weaving text together. They may have been done because this is an oral culture. They never saw at that time the Bible with such kind of layout. They listened, and there were repetitions that would catch the attention, that would make them remember. And then as you go through these threads, horizontal or vertical, you will find relations between them. For instance, the last thread, all are concerned with time. There is a Sabbath year, the Sabbath day, and then there are the festivals. And let me then close, beyond this reference to the literary phenomenon, let me close with the fact that the Sabbath law given in chapter 23, in verse 12 and 13, adds another rationale, motivation for the law. so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the slave born in your household, and the alien as well may be refreshed. That is, the purpose of the Sabbath is to remember the creation, to remember the deliverance of God, but it's also to give freedom to the animals and to the people. So these mishpatim in chapters 21 to 23, in a sense, builds on the major foundational principles of the Ten Commandments presented in chapter 20. And thank you for listening to this tidbit. Welcome back as we move on into chapter 24 and the remainder of Exodus for our next tidbits.